live with a Roman triumph from Austin, Texas. I'm Charlie.
And this is Andrei from outside fair city of Alexandria, Virginia.
Andrei, my man, you look like you just came from a Royal triumph, a triumphus.
Yeah, we just crushed the German barbarians in the field of battle, but lost many a legion. Unfortunately, it was
In the Teutoburg Forest?
yes. Except in this case, we won. In this alternate history, we were triumphant.
I hear you. So now we have a triumph going on. Very nice. Very nice. Well, Andrei is wearing the wreath and he's wearing what are you wearing around your neck? Tell us what you're wearing around your neck.
Yeah, this is the laurel wreath, just sort of like their version of the crown, and this is just a late Roman or Byzantine era early Christian pendant. It has the what's known as the Chi Rho, which is the two Greek letters. It looks like in English like an X and an R, which makes the word Christos.
Christos in Greek, which is the basis of Christ. Well,
yeah,
Andrei,
we decided to actually take a detour in this episode to talk about the impact of Rome and the Roman Empire on everything today, in light of this meme that's been going around about how men all think about the Roman Empire all the time.
yeah, I mean, basically, we were going to go give our sacrifices at Jupiter's Temple on the Capitoline Hill, right? And we just figured before we do that at the temple, we should make a podcast. Why is it that men are obsessed with Rome? What's going on with that? And given that we've done sort of other podcast on Byzantium, which is effectively, as we discussed in other podcasts, the continuation of Rome, and the Byzantines saw themselves as Romans, and there's just a post-Byzantine conception of like the Byzantines seeing themselves as separate from Romans, and that we did the episode on Polybius and the Roman Republic. Obviously, Rome is somewhat on our minds as well. So what's going on with this meme, Andrei?
Yeah, I think the meme is something that the format is like, it's often like a woman that might ask a man why she thinks about the Roman Empire so much. And this kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just, I mean, on the one hand, it's just a meme, so it's exaggerated. And a lot of people, when they answer that, they say, yes, I think about it all the time, like every day, but they never really specify what they mean by that, by them thinking about that. And it's a very general thing. I think for a lot of people, they might be specifically into like the military aspect of Rome, all its conquests, the iconic legionaries.
Yeah, and there was that awesome Rome movie with about the Colosseum and everything from '99 that was very historically accurate.
You mean Gladiator?
Yeah, Gladiator. But I was also actually thinking about Titus, like Titus Andronicus as well. But yeah, Gladiator is also a really good one.
Titus Pullo from the miniseries Rome was badass.
Interesting. I only watched a little bit of the miniseries of Rome, but that might be part of the fascination as well, because you got all these cool movies like late 90s, early 2000s, people talking about Rome. Obviously, one thing we wanted to touch on is it affects our modern world a lot. I mean, you're near Alexandria, Virginia, which is right next door to the nation's capital. That obviously takes a lot from Rome, not just in terms of laws, but in terms of architecture. I mean, the Temple of Jupiter itself looks like the Capitol building on Capitol Hill, Capitoline Hill in Rome. I think these are all intentional connections that the framers of the Constitution and the founding generation of the American Republic were trying to connect to.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious. Can't really be overstated how much influence that had on the early United States. Obviously, the neoclassical architecture that we all know with the columns, sometimes employing a mixture of Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns, as the Romans did. Not to mention the actual structure of government, which we touched on in the Polybius episode about, the division of government into this tripartite judiciary, executive, and legislative branches, also influenced by the Roman Republic, probably more so than Greek direct democracy. And obviously the Senate in this country holds a lot of esteem, as did that of Rome back in the day.
Well, I mean, yes, I would agree with you. It is very Roman. I would say the structure of the Roman Constitution is definitely like a Latin originated thing. But there's that famous quote: "Conquered Greece took captive her savage conqueror and brought her arts into rustic Rome." So, yeah, but I think the architecture certainly was influenced by Rome or by Greece, but ultimately a lot of the legalistic thinking. I mean, there's studies of Byzantine law and Roman law that still affect us today. And I mean, those are just some aspects. And we have the Julian calendar, right? The Gregorian calendar before that. Roman technology was really big, like the use of concrete. They evidently had a type of concrete that wasn't discovered. It was like a lost technology until the 20th century. Models of warfare like that lasted all the way to the Napoleonic era. Again, like the aqueducts, that the use of animal power, water power, their understanding of like the sun and everything. And you might even add the Byzantine fire, as it's been called, is sort of a Roman science, right?
Yeah, Greek fires. Yeah, it's an extension of that. That was by the Byzantines. Very fascinating. Something that they haven't really been able to replicate even in the modern era. It's closest to something like that we have called naphtha, and I guess it was like in the form of ancient napalm, but they don't know exactly what it was. It was this like oil sent through a siphon and lit the right way that it could continue to stay lit in water and basically
and devastating to the enemy ships primarily.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm thinking about the concrete though. If you go back to classical Roman times, it's very very noteworthy in that like that stuff we still don't know exactly what it was composed of or how they made it so well, and it stands a test of time in a way that our modern one does not. Like, if you see how often we have to repave our roads and fix things like that, they didn't have to do that. Their roads lasted like 2,000 years and are still, in many ways like around.
I was in well, you definitely get to the Colosseum, but I was in Rome like in July, and the Roman Pantheon is the largest unreinforced like concrete dome in the world. That was made in 128 AD, and it's doing fine. I mean, it's just crazy. And again, tell us about the Colosseum too.
The Colosseum was also is made of that same, very durable material that they had during that time. And it was also I mean, there's a lot more to it that didn't survive today. It had, giant awning that extended partway over the crowd, like over the middle of the stadium. It had reinforcements to kind of, so apparently I heard the way that was built was it was built in different stages by different contractors, and they had different groups of engineers working on it simultaneously that had to kind of meet together, and they used different techniques, but they somehow were able to make it all kind of work in the end. And they use like steel to kind of bind the stone together and reinforce it and make it really hold in a way that's kind of stood the test of time. So very impressive feat of engineering. Apparently there were even people who like sprayed water onto the crowd, and like they threw snacks and stuff at them, kind of in the way that like you get at a modern like sports event. So there are a lot of parallels to ancient Rome that you can find still in our society. The main difference was obviously like technology and whatnot, and
language,
language, Latin left a mark on Europe that still stands to this day. I mean, there's the Romance languages, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Romanian, Catalan, and a bunch of other smaller ones. but then it also left like thousands of words and borrowings and like English
Right.
and other languages in the form of like scientific and academic words and roots. So, you know, Latin's not going anywhere in that regard, and that
Yeah.
it's a permanent part of our language.
Latina est gaudium et utilis. Latin is fun and useful.
Exactly.
But yeah, like you said, the Coliseum. I mean, if you look at modern football stadiums, modern soccer stadiums, they look like the Coliseum. So it's
Yeah,
a massive influence. So I mean, almost in one sense, with the one thing we were talking about before this podcast, you think about Rome, even if you don't realize you're thinking about Rome. So
exactly.
everyone's frankly thinking about Rome quite a bit.
This is the thing, you can't really help it, and you might not know it. So what else can we touch on?
I mean, I guess a big issue is like Christianity. I mean, was sort of
Yeah,
formalized under the Roman
yeah,
Republic, or excuse
exactly.
me, the Roman Empire, and I mean, it plays a big role in the New Testament as well. And it's fascinating. I mean, in many sense, like Rome is the reason, Emperor Constantine adopting the Christian religion is the reason that Christianity expanded so much.
That's right. I mean, so yeah, it's funny. Like the started off with the crucifixion of Jesus by the Romans. They kind of ignored the early Christians as just a crazy sect of Judaism for a long time, and then over time they became bigger and bigger. Started being these persecutions, and then the right person happened to adopt it at the right time. Boy
Yeah,
Constantine.
and it makes sense that they were kind of afraid of it, the Romans. I mean, think about playing the telephone game when you're in elementary school and you get like someone says something and somebody says something else, and so they hear about like there's a baby involved, there's someone was died but they came back to life, and then they're drinking blood, and then they're drinking the body of the person as well. So like imagine playing the telephone game and getting all that, you'd say, wow, this is kind of strange.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it
for
makes
sure.
it
I
makes a
mean,
lot of sense.
if you think about it, yeah, it probably twisted the truth a lot, by the time it got to people. But then again, a lot of the ancient Greco-Roman myths themselves had a lot of pretty fantastical elements too. So I think it was mostly the subversive element in that it subverted
Yeah.
the authority of the emperor, by promising a afterlife beyond that of this mortal coil, and so something to look forward to after. And it didn't really matter your station on earth, and its general appeal to the wider population without as much discrimination of social class and rank and all that at the time. And it was very much like supported by the poor. But then the right people, more important people, the nobility, adopted it, and then it blew up. Like no one could have seen that coming. And there were other competing kind of mystery cults or sects at the time, including Mithraism, which
Yeah.
had a lot of similarities with Christianity, but also some key differences. It originated somewhere like in the
In
east of the empire.
modern Iran, yeah.
Yeah, it had an Iranian influence for sure, and had some Zoroastrian influences. But yeah,
It's interesting to consider what would have happened. I mean, it's possible. What if Constantine adopted Mithraism instead of
that's yeah,
Christianity? Well, I mean,
that's also a thing. I just don't think, even though it was popular for a given amount of time, it didn't have like the universal appeal of Christianity, and I think there's a limit to how big it could have gotten. It was more underground, both literally and figuratively, in that their devotional kind of altars were like these caves
in
or
caves,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And there's even like Mithraeum caves in Italy, right? And there's
Oh,
even
they
some
were
found
all
outside of Rome itself.
over the empire as far as Britain even. So
Yeah, as far as Britain, all the way to Syria, Dalmatia,
that's
and
right. Yeah,
yeah,
Dacia,
and
all that.
Numidia, the African, like Numidia, the territory, like the northern part of Africa,
Yeah,
like the kingdom of Numidia.
that's right. Yeah, I mean, it was very popular among the border lands, the frontiers, because a lot of soldiers adopted Mithraism for some reason.
I would argue one thing that perhaps isn't Roman is this idea of monotheism, because the Romans were really good at incorporating other gods. You know, they conquered the Celts; those are pagans. We can incorporate them into our pantheon. We conquered the Greeks; they're pagan. We can incorporate them into the pagan pantheon. But then all of a sudden, we have to deal with monotheism in the Hebrew conception of God, and that doesn't really fit in with our pantheon. So we can't really colonize them. And I think that's one of the major issues that the Romans had with monotheism. And so that's an example of something that isn't necessarily Roman that many think of on a frequent basis.
That's true. Obviously, Christianity had to be kind of molded to fit a lot of the other people's. There's a degree of syncretism, which is like they take elements of existing religions, so the Germans, the Celts, Slavs, and kind of blended those pagan beliefs into Christianity to make them more appealing to those ancient Europeans. And that's how we got to the kind of Christianity we have today, with all the a lot like Christmas and Easter and all that obviously have, elements of pre-Christian pagan sort of practices and beliefs.
It's interesting. Syncretism is like almost a type of colonialism in a way, where you're kind of amalgamating all these different religions. Just as a side note, it might be, it comes from syncretismus in Latin, but that comes from the Greek syncretismos, which is to unite. And actually it comes from Cretan, like the idea of Cretans, like unifying Crete. It's like sin is putting together the Cretes. So the first idea of syncretism
is I wasn't aware of that etymology, and I'm a big fan of etymology.
And I think that kind of brings an idea of syncretism into the idea. I mean, there was like Greco-Egyptian syncretism, and I think and so there's ideas of like Hermes being mixed in with Anubis, and Roman and Celtic gods being Tranus and Jupiter kind of being amalgamated together. It's very cool.
So there's we could go at length. This could even be the subject of entirely different podcast at some point, but we're just kind of touching on some of the big legacies of Rome. We talked about the legal aspect, of course, like the codification of law throughout the Republic, this kind of healthy disdain for tyranny that is still a big part of modern American democracy. The Code of Justinian, of course.
The Code of Justinian that came about during what we now call the Byzantine Empire, but as we've mentioned,
that was even like sort of a transitionary phase between classical and medieval Rome. So
but it took a lot of the concepts that existed in the Roman Republic and the earlier Roman Empire, and they kind of digested these principles together into that Codex Justinianus. It's interesting. A lot of people say that this is the basis of civil law, and it is the basis of civil law. But what's even more curious, in a way, is that it's almost flipped, because they say civil law to distinguish from common law, as in judge-made law. Really, the Code of Justinian just codifies all this judge-made law. So really, Roman law is a bunch of common law that was codified and now is the basis of civil law.
That's right. Over time, it was codified from a bunch of legal decisions, precedents. Well, the 12 tablets, I think, was the original in the early. So it's fascinating to kind of trace how all that went over the very long, kind of 1,000-year plus history of Rome in some form. That's what I find fascinating. Like, the tracing the history back from like the early Republic, their founding, their breakaway from the Etruscan tyranny, the early Republic, the Punic Wars, the paranoia they had of the enemies around them, both in form of Carthage and the Greeks, and their eventual conquest and absorption of those. And then they kind of had this insatiable lust for conquest, and they kept going and going until they had much of the Mediterranean, Europe. And then obviously things started breaking down. They split in half after a crisis in the 3rd century. then, you know, Christianity came. Eventually, the West declined after Attila, and the Goths invaded. The East kind of went on to do its own thing. But through all that, they still held the institution of the Senate even during the imperial time in some form. It had some prestige, maybe only nominal by the late period, not literal, but
that means they held on to that original idea of what it was to be the Roman Republic, that idea that started in Rome.
that's right.
And that's incredible. I would say even up to 1453, they had the Roman Senate, right?
That's true. Yeah, they had the Byzantines maintained the Senate in some form. I think even until like the 7th or 8th century, it had some, you know, semi-important, you know, value to it. And then, yeah, after a while, it became very ceremonial, and there are other new positions created. But the whole time, yeah, they did think of themselves as the, you know, cultural descendants of Rome. And even during like the empire after Augustus, and, you know, in the times of like of Nero and Caligula and Titus and all, and you know, they still, I mean, the Senate still kind of, they still tried to hold on to the pretense of being sort of a republic in a way, even though obviously things had changed. The earlier part of the Roman Empire, the first half of it was known as the Principate, where the emperors kind of still took a step back and deferred to other bodies in the government. After Diocletian's reforms, since the empire was falling apart, he had to be the strong man to kind of pull it back together, and it became the dominant then, where the emperor became almost deified and kind of more detached from the population, didn't interact as much directly with them, and much more directly dominant over the empire, as opposed to during the Principate era, which is an interesting distinction that historians sometimes make. But and that's also interesting to like to look at the history of the emperor in terms of Christianity as the leader of the Christian Roman people and all that. But that could be like a whole different.
I mean, that could be a whole podcast
Yeah.
on the Catholic Church and I mean the Vatican.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
And I mean,
yeah,
certainly that is a one way that many people in the modern world still relate to the Roman Empire is through their religion and Catholicism.
Yeah, Roman Catholicism, the Pope, obviously, and then all the different orders of Catholicism and the missionaries that spread around the world. I mean, that's another direct kind of legacy of it.
Yeah. And I mean, perhaps the architectural splendor, I mean, still exists there. You can go to Rome, you can see all the Roman Forum, you can see the Colosseum, you can see the Pantheon, all the obelisks. There's more obelisks in Rome than there are in Egypt.
That's funny. Yeah, they kind of stole a lot of them.
It's a fascinating concept. I guess we really scratched the surface as to answering this question about this meme. Why are people obsessed with Rome, and specifically why are men obsessed with Rome? I guess we kind of gave more personal accounts and kind of the things that we're interested in. And this podcast is almost a testament to it as well.
And it might not be the same for everybody. Different people might like different things, but I think there is also sort of on some level an embodiment of like a certain type of masculinity in a way. Like, you know, people think of like, you know, the military of Rome and like the emperor. This is all like a lot of leading men.
Yeah,
I think that's what's. I'm not saying that's necessarily the best way to come at it, but I think for a lot of people, they do associate that with it.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it represents some sort of archetypal perspective. And I mean, that's maybe why like the founding generation of the Americans, like Washington was obsessed with Rome. And I think there was a play about a Roman hero during in Valley Forge, like kind of at the nadir point of the American Revolution, with trying to inspire the troops to try to be true Roman soldiers in a way and hold on to Roman virtue.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's definitely that virtue, like you said, is a very important element of Roman culture throughout it all. And that's not to say that women also weren't important in the history of Rome. There's a lot of drama throughout every period of Roman history in which, they were, very important and played like a big role in things. I mean, I think that's the other reason why it's so, because it's very, very spicy, juicy history. At any point, you can find like people that you can make an entire sort of mini series, on HBO or whatever off of, which they obviously they did make. I think
Yeah.
the late period unfortunately gets ignored a little more, and obviously the Byzantines even more. I think there's just as much, that happened then, but we all kind of think of that more early classical era. And yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of intrigue and political court drama and all that. So that's one, I think, element that people come at it from. They might romanticize it a little bit, but for what it's
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, even in 1950s, I mean, 40s, 50s, 60s, there was a lot of movies about Rome as well. So I mean, it's a perennial topic that comes up a lot.
Yeah, those old they call it sword and sandal genre. That was very
Yeah.
popular in the mid 20th century. Yeah. I think there's a lot of, yeah, and then like in Italy they were big too, but like stuff like, I guess, like Ben-Hur and Spartacus, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Kirk Douglas as
Yeah.
Ulysses. Yeah, I mean, they had so many from Troy, right, to the sack of Rome, to all those just crazy good ones.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there were some like such as Theodora and things like that in the later Roman Empire, but most of
Yeah.
them are in that earlier Roman Empire, sword and sandal.
Yeah. I mean, you can say what you will, they were cheesy by today's standards, but there's something to be said for them. I do kind of like that style in a way.
Same. I think Steve Reeves as Hercules was pretty. I mean, it's almost comical, but it represents an archetype, right? I mean,
Certainly does. I mean, I'm partial to the Hercules, the Legendary Man, with Kevin Sorbo in the '90s, along with
oh yeah, that was fun, and there was crossovers with Xena, right?
yeah, Xena Warrior Princess.
Yeah, classic '90s, fun.
Those were the days. Yeah.
Yeah. Incorporating mythology and things, good times. Interacting with Hades and Artemis and all those fun people.
Yep. Which I guess, yeah, the mythology is another reason why people are into it, because it's kind of an escape from the modern world.
Right. Yeah. And you think like maybe they have some ideas that might help us, you know what I mean? Like, oh, you like I want to be like Hercules, or if we can just use our minds like Iolus or something. It just something to think. Yeah.
I think people might have a perception too that there's like, as men, like their lives were more in some way, like they could be part of the system and more valuable and meaningful than today, when things have really changed a lot. Like psychologically speaking, I don't know if this is valid or not, but it's something I've thought about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you felt like you're more of a collected whole in which you could, I don't know, have a more clearly defined role in society, and you knew what
Yeah.
your role was, and you didn't have to like live with as much anxiety regarding your role in
Right.
society.
You
Yeah.
had you had plenty of other anxieties at different
Plenty of anxieties.
points,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like the Goths or Huns, decapitating you or enslaving you, or you being made a slave or whatnot. But
Yeah. Or famine, or,
yeah, plague, famine. Although there was
volcanoes.
an unprecedented period of peace during the Pax Romana,
Pax Romana.
yeah,
Yeah.
which would not be seen again for many centuries, honestly. So there's something to
Yeah.
be said for that. Um,
Marcus Aurelius.
yeah, and then the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, Stoicism, and various other.
Oh, that influences us so much today. I mean,
Yeah,
there's so many podcasts and videos and documentaries about Stoicism, and it's a great philosophy, actually.
yeah. If it's
It,
understood correctly, I think some people, some men might,
yes,
they take
yeah,
it to heart in the wrong way, and then they become a little. They think it's all about being emotionless, aloof, and cold, and
oh yeah,
it's not necessarily. Yeah.
yeah. One of my favorite parts, I think it's like book 4, book 5 of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He says it's a diary, so he's thinking to himself, "Should I wake up in the morning? It's so comfortable here. I like it under the covers." And he says, "Were you born to sleep under the covers? Were you born for this? You're born to go out and do things." And it's an interesting perspective. He's like, the birds and the bees and the flowers and the plants and the harvest, they all have their job to do. Why aren't you going to do your job? You just,
That's
it's
a
an
very
interesting
interesting
dialogue with himself, and he's emperor, right? So he could have stayed in under his sheets the whole time. He could have done whatever he
yeah.
wanted.
It's a very inspirational quote. I mean, there's so much of what he says is, and I think he was like the ultimate. He had the ultimate power in the world at the time, and he stayed a very humble man despite all that. And
Yeah,
he didn't even necessarily want to be an emperor and have all the responsibility, but he did what he had to. And during his time, that was one of the most stable and prosperous eras of Rome. But he also devoted a lot of his time to recording, in his private journals. A
that he
lot of
never
his writings
expected to be published.
yeah, they were never meant to be published. And I think he even asked them to be destroyed originally, but then
Yeah.
the guy who read them said like, no, this can't go to waste, and they had to be published. So
It's interesting, and there's still quite a few monuments to to Marcus Aurelius in Rome. I mean, there's a huge column, his statue. I mean, he's still seen as a really good leader. And I think even modern US generals, I'm sure elsewhere in the world, generals like look up to him as like, this is a good guy who we can be.
yeah, oh yeah, he's very very easy to want to emulate him. I agree.
Yeah.
I will say though, like we've obviously been singing the praises of Rome and everything for the last like half hour, but that's not to say it was all sunshine and roses. There
No,
were
by
a
any
lot
means.
of negative aspects to it, as with any period of human history. There's a lot of cruelty, a lot of war, obviously, like crucifixion, slavery, constant warfare. At times, like they had so many men, so they threw thousands and thousands of soldiers at the enemy, like basically like fodder, and then that helped them win some of the early
Yes.
wars that
Yeah.
they had.
They
So
had bloody games in the circuses,
yeah,
right?
the Colosseums, yep.
Chariot racing. They had those insane emperors.
Yeah,
like
well, not to
Caligula and
be
Nero.
corruption. I mean, yeah, but this
Yeah.
happens, I think, to some extent in any era. Just sometimes it's more overt, sometimes it's more covert.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I guess the idea is try to take the ideas that are good, like take the bits of Marcus Aurelius's meditations, realize not everything about Rome was perfect. It was a very interesting time. It's a great time to study. It's definitely good to be thinking and considering it, because it can mirror a lot of our life these days, as we tried to point out.
Yeah,
But yeah, take a lot of it with a grain of salt and with a critical mind. Just don't blindly love everything about Rome.
speaking of like the mirroring of today's, I mean, a lot of people like to contrast like the so-called decline, the perceived decline of the United States, to Rome, and I don't know how apt a lot of those comparisons might actually be, but essentially, and there've been a lot of media like Star Wars. They basically the fall of the Republic and transformation into the Empire, that was very clearly based on Rome. So there's a lot of modern parallels in politics, but both in fiction and sometimes reality that you can find in there. That's a whole nother debate, though. I mean, about the current state of things, and
Well, I'm wearing the Star Wars
stuff.
shirt, so I got
Yeah,
the fictional Roman Empire, and you have the wreath of the Roman Empire.
that's
That
right.
was
That's kind of a throwback to our first episode when we were talking about Star Wars.
the Rome that was and the Rome to be.
Galaxy far, far away. Yeah.
That is to be. Yeah, I love it.
But yeah, I think that I mean, we probably didn't even cover half of the legacy of Rome, but
Yeah,
it's kind of thought of some of the big reasons why people might be thinking of Rome, all the time,
yeah.
this day and age.
Sounds good. There was a dream of Rome. There was a dream of Rome, as Marcus Aurelius said. And the dream lives within us.
That it does. Yeah,
Good
so I
talk,
guess
man.
that wraps it up for this episode of the Charlie and Andrei podcast.
We'll see you next time after we go to the Temple of Jupiter.
So long.
So long.
Ave. And as an addendum to the points listed in the podcast, also wanted to add some other important um, legacies of Rome that we didn't note. The Roman numeral system, for one, still kind of lives with us to this day in some form. The 12-hour day, popularized by the Romans, the days of the week, or at least some of them were influenced in English by the Latin days of the week and adapted to the English language. Um, then you have the months of the year, even more so. Very many of them are based directly off the Latin names. You had all kinds of other architectural marvels, the arch, the hypocaust, which is a sort of heating system they used to heat the floors underneath Roman homes, the layout of homes. You had poetry, literature, people like Virgil, Tacitus, Cato the Elder, Pliny, Livy, all these great writers, historians, art, and a lot of this was preserved in the Middle Ages in some way indirectly, but during the Renaissance, they actually consciously tried to lead a revival of ancient Greco-Roman thought that some in Italy believed was lost during the Middle Ages. So that kind of brought Rome back in vogue in some ways and adapted it to the early modern era. So there's a lot of things. The list could honestly just go on and on. The educational system, kinds of various inventions, aqueducts we forgot to mention, Roman roads, siege technology, which was used for ages to come, armor, that kind of thing, and then just the very idea of empire continued on and influenced things like the British Empire, for example, over a millennia later. So overall, there's no shortage of impact that Rome had, and should note that a lot of the ancient Greek philosophy and elements of governance and debate and all the myths and stories were brought to us not directly but through the filter of Rome. So they were responsible for a lot of that too. Obviously, a lot of their gods paralleled existing Greek gods like Jupiter, Zeus. You had Neptune, Poseidon. You had even heroes like Hercules, Heracles, etc., etc. Finally, let's not forget winemaking. Winemaking was one of the central aspects of what it meant to be Roman and Roman culture. This contrasted them to the barbarians outside the empire in many cases. And the things they were able to bring to the art of winemaking and things like barrel aging and the cultivation of certain very good strains of grapes and general viticulture. It was very important, and they exported a lot of that to countries that later became known for winemaking, like you had Gaul, which became France, Spain. They brought it to Britain, the province of Britannia, for a little while, but didn't really stick after their retreat. But it also made its way to Germany and many places around the Mediterranean. So next time you're sipping on that nice glass of red wine, maybe thank the Romans in part. So overall, no shortage of things we can really thank them for. So just something to remember next time someone asks you why you think of Rome so much. In conclusion, just want to say thank you for watching our video. Please give us a like if you enjoy it. Please, more importantly, leave a comment if you have something to say or something you want to talk about, discuss further, or any ideas for future podcasts, we're more than willing to listen. Have a good day, and signing off.